What's up guys, Perry from Rockville here, and today I'm going to show you how to set up your BD20. So along with the light itself, it also comes with a power cable to power or charge your light, and you also get a wireless remote to control some of the functions for the light. When you turn the light on, you'll notice the battery status light, so you can always tell how much battery your light has. So whenever it's low, you can take the included power cable and plug it into the power in socket, and then plug the other end into a power outlet to charge your light. There's also a power out socket, so you could electrically daisy chain some lights together so that they all charge at the same time. So on the top of the light, you'll notice this bracket here that we can use to mount our light onto a truss. So to do that, you're also going to need a lighting clamp like this one here, which is our very own LC70 lighting clamp. So for the setup, you're gonna take your lighting clamp here, you're gonna look for this bolt on the bottom and unscrew it. Once you've taken out the bolt, you're gonna run the bolt through this hole here in the middle of the bracket. And once you have that bolt run through, you're gonna take your lighting clamp and screw it back onto the bolt. So now that we've got the lighting clamp attached to the light, we can now mount it onto our truss. So to do that, we're gonna loosen the butterfly screw here on the clamp. Now that we have a nice opening here on our clamp, we can now choose a spot on our truss where we want to mount the light, line the clamp onto that spot, and then tighten the butterfly screw to secure the light onto the truss. You can use the knobs here on the side of your bracket to adjust the angle of the light for whatever suits best for your setup. And once you have your light all set up to the truss, you can use the built-in functionalities for the light, set it up to wireless DMX or master slave mode, and much more. So before we dive into the setup, let's just go over what everything does here on the back of the light. So you have the power switch on the back to turn the light on and off. Next to that, you have the power in socket. So if your battery is running low on the light, you can take the included power cable and plug the female end into the power in socket, then plug the other end to your wall outlet to get the light to charge. We also have the power out socket, so we can electrically daisy chain the power coming from this light out to another light so that they're both charging at the same time. And again, you can gauge the battery life using the battery status light on the back. On top, we have the DMX in and the DMX out. We can use the DMX in to connect signal from outside sources like a DMX controller, a master light, etc. And then we can use the DMX out to daisy chain out to another light. On the top left corner, we have the on and off switch for the wireless DMX feature. Wireless DMX allows you to set the light up to a wireless DMX controller or to another wireless DMX light by using wireless DMX signal. We'll be going over that more in depth when we set the light up to a wireless DMX controller later on. And on the bottom, we have the controls for the light. So we have the menu button to switch between the different modes for the light, the up and down buttons to cycle between different settings or different sub-menus, and the enter button to enter a mode or to save our changes. So now let's go through some of the different functions on our light. So the first mode we have is the DMX mode, which helps you set up the DMX address for the light. This mode will be useful when setting your light up to a DMX controller. Next, we have the auto mode where we can cycle between 3 different preset shows using the up and down buttons. Next, we have the sound mode where the light will change by the sound being picked up by the built-in microphone. So if I clap, you'll see that the light starts to change. In sound mode, we can actually adjust the sensitivity of the built-in microphone by pressing the enter button. From here, you can use the up and down buttons to adjust the sensitivity or volume. So if you have it set to 1, this is where the light will be least sensitive to sound. And if you set it all the way up to 9, it would be the most sensitive. So you can adjust it between these 2 points or anywhere in the middle depending on the setup that you want. Next, we have the manual mode where we can use sub-menus to set our light to a custom show or color. So when you cycle to the manual mode, you can press enter to access the first sub-menu, which is the master dimmer. So I'm gonna press enter on the dimmer mode so I can adjust the brightness, and then I can use the up and down buttons to set it to the desired brightness. So for right now, I'm gonna set it to 100. Once you have your settings set, you can press enter to move on to the next setting, which is the strobe. So I can press enter on mode to adjust how much I want the light to strobe. For this demo, I'm going to set it to 50. Then I can press enter, move on to the next mode, which is the red LEDs, so I can control how much red I want to come through my sequence here. So I'm gonna press enter on red, and I'll set this to about 100. So now that I have a color set, you can see the brightness and the strobe since we adjusted those settings earlier. There's also a control for the green LEDs, so I'm gonna set that to about 50. So now we have some red and green in the mix, so I can now move on to blue, where I can bring out some blue LEDs. So I'll set that to about 50 as well. And there's also a setting for the white LEDs, so I'm going to set that to 100. The next sub-menu is for the motor for the light, which will change the overall display or projection that the light gives off. So for example, I can press enter on this mode, and if I set this pretty high, you'll then start to see the lights moving around because of the motor inside. After the motor, it brings us back to the dimmer setting, so I can press the menu button to bring us back to the mode menu. The last mode here is the IR mode, where we can set this mode on or off so that the light will work with our wireless remote. So while it's set to IR on, this means that the light will work with our remote, and when it's set to IR off, that means it won't work with the remote. Speaking of which, you can always use the wireless remote to control all of these settings. So now that we have a better understanding for the light, let's now see how we can set it up to a DMX controller. Now there's a few different approaches here for a DMX controller. So if you have a standard DMX controller, you can use the DMX out of the controller and daisy chain your lights to the controller using DMX cables. But the cool thing about these lights is that they come with a wireless DMX feature, so you can set them up to a wireless DMX controller. So if you want to use this feature, you just want to make sure that your DMX controller has the wireless DMX feature, and you can tell by looking at the back of the controller. And if you see this switch here along with a button and a light on top, you'll know you're in good shape. So the first thing I'm gonna do for this setup is turn on the wireless DMX for my controller and turn on the wireless DMX for your light, which is this switch here on the top left corner. So as soon as you do that, you're gonna notice these wireless DMX signals light up, which are these little lights over here. So the way that wireless DMX works is that you want these wireless DMX signals between your lights and your controller to match up. And these wireless DMX signals are color coded, so we have a few different options on how they can all link together. So for example, if I go to the wireless DMX signal on my light and press this button here right above the light, you can see that we can cycle between a few different colors. So we've got red, green, yellow, blue, pink, cyan, and white. So these are the different options that we can use between the wireless DMX signals. If you go to switch this on your controller, you'll notice that all of these signals are available as well. So to link up these lights to our controller, let's first decide a color that we want to use for our wireless DMX signal. I think we should use the blue signal for today. So I'm gonna press this button here on my controller until the wireless signal shows up blue. And as soon as that's set, I'm gonna do that for my lights as well. So I'll go to my first light here and press the wireless DMX signal button until it hits the blue color. Then I'll do the exact same thing on my second light. And after we do that, you'll see the signal light on our controller light up red, while the signal lights on our lights light up green, letting us know that the lights are in sync to our controller. On top of setting up our lights to the same wireless DMX signal, we also want to set them to the same DMX address. So to do that, we're going to press the menu button until we get to the DMX mode, which is the D00 setting. And then we can use the up and down buttons to cycle between the different DMX addresses. So for today, I'm going to set them to D001. So after we do that, we can activate scanner 1 on our controller, and now we can go through the different faders and see what they do for our lights. Fader 1 acts as the master dimmer for the light, so if I raise that up and look at the display here on the top right corner, you're gonna see these numbers adjusted, which represent the value that the fader is at. 0 is the lowest value we can set our fader to, and 255 is the highest value we can set it to. So for this demo, I'm gonna set the dimmer all the way up. Next we have fader 2 to control the strobe for the light. So I'm gonna raise that about halfway, and you're not gonna see anything come up yet because we haven't set a color for the light. We can adjust the colors for the light with faders 3, 4, 5, and 6. So if I play with fader 3, that's going to adjust the red LEDs. So as you can see, we start to see some red now. I'm actually gonna turn the strobe off so we just see the colors. So after fader 3, we have fader 4 to control the green LEDs. We can raise fader 5 to control the blue LEDs, and fader 6 to control the white LEDs. We can use fader 7 to control the motor for the light, so the more I raise it, the more you'll see the light start to move. And next we have fader 8, which will set the light to preset modes depending on the value it's set to. So for example, if I set the value for this fader anywhere from 6 to 55, you'll then start to see this automated mode show up. Now if I switch to a value between 56 and 100, you'll see a different mode start to appear. You can always refer to the DMX guide to show you which values activate which mode for fader 8. Now on my DMX controller, I actually have to use the page select to activate the last fader, which is fader 9, and this will control the speed for fader 8. So the more I raise fader 9, the faster you'll see these modes go. Now, like I mentioned, if you don't have a wireless DMX controller, you can always use DMX cables to connect your lights to your controller. So I can take one DMX cable and plug the male end into the DMX out of my controller, then plug the other end into the DMX in on my first light. And now to connect my first light to another light, I'm gonna take another DMX cable and plug the male end into the DMX out of my first light, then plug the other end into the DMX in on the next light. And if you wanna connect even more lights, you're just gonna follow the same process. Remember to set your lights to the same DMX address so that they communicate with your controller. So again, for today, we're gonna set it to D001. And now if I use my controller, you'll then see the lights start to follow. Now, if you wanted to control multiple lights at once without a DMX controller, you can always use the master-slave function. You can actually do this in a couple of different ways. So one way being by using a DMX cable to connect your lights together, and the second way is by using the wireless DMX feature. Here's a quick refresher on how the wireless DMX works. So if we go to one of our lights and turn on the wireless DMX feature, you're gonna see this light pop up, which is the wireless DMX signal. You can use this button here on the top to switch between different signals which are color coded, and all you're gonna wanna do to connect more lights together is by setting them to the same wireless DMX signal color. So let's use this light here as our master light and set it up to a wireless DMX signal. For today, I'm gonna set it up to blue. I'm then gonna go to the slave light and turn on the wireless DMX mode. And I'm gonna use the button here on the second light to set it to the same wireless DMX signal of blue. So now if we go to our master light here and set it up to one of the auto modes, you'll then see the second light start to follow. If at first you're set to the DMX mode on your master light, but then switch to a different mode like the auto mode you're seeing here, you'll then see the wireless DMX signal on your master light flash red, while the wireless DMX signal on your slave light flashes green. So you can either use the menu buttons on your master light to switch the display of the lights in your chain, or you can use the wireless remote. Before using the wireless remote with your lights in master slave mode, we actually recommend going into the IR settings of your lights first. So on our master light, we're gonna go to the menu button and switch to the IR mode and make sure that it's set to IR on. Then we're gonna go to the IR mode on all of our slave lights and set it to IR off. This way the remote will work with our master light only, so if we accidentally point it to a slave light and change a feature, it won't throw off the lights in the rest of the chain. So now if I use my remote with the master light, you'll see that the slave light will start to follow. And like I mentioned, we can also link our lights together by using a DMX cable. So if I'm using this light as my master light again, I can take my cable and plug the male end into the DMX out, then plug the other end into the DMX in on my next light. And if you want to set up even more lights, you're gonna follow the same process. And now if I use my remote again on the master light, you'll see that the other light starts to follow. So now let's actually take a closer look at the wireless remote here for the BD20s. On top we have the power button, which will actually only turn the bulbs of the light on or off, but not the overall light in general. Next we have these up and down buttons for the settings menu, so we can cycle between different settings. We have the sound mode here, which will set our lights to the sound mode. And then we can adjust the sensitivity with these buttons right underneath. Next, we have the auto button to set our lights to the different auto modes. So if we press it once, we set it to auto 1. If we press it again, we set it to auto 2. And then once more for auto 3. Next, we have the manual button to set our lights to manual mode. Underneath we have these up and down buttons to cycle between different colors. We can also set up the strobe by using these up and down buttons here. And we can also control the motor speed with these buttons here. And lastly, we have these two DMX buttons to cycle between the different DMX addresses on our lights. So hopefully this showed you guys how easy it is to set up your BD20 lights. But of course, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to reach out to our customer support team through phone or email. As always, I'm Perry from Rockville, and we'll see you guys next time.